I find a potential running thread between your two passions or your two large endeavors is maybe about controlling fear, right? You've written about how in your consulting work, when you go to people about different things they can do with their ads, and asked whether you could deploy this for other fashion companies, you said no. Most of them are too afraid to do this, right?
Sure.
There's a fearlessness that is implied in everything you do, and there's this approach to fear. Overcoming fear to achieve your outcomes seems to be one of the running threads I find in your work.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, to me, what I have always just found from a marketing perspective, whatever you're doing, whatever industry you're in, that there's a premium attached to being boring. So if you're boring, if you're afraid, if you're timid, everything costs more. Everything is harder. When you're interesting, when you're unique, when you're the only one doing a thing, it stands out. Like when I proposed my first book about Stoicism, my publisher was not very excited. It's an obscure school of ancient philosophy. They were not like, let's back up the Brinks truck and just throw money at you. In fact, they offered me considerably less money than I got for my first book. The irony now is, like, on a regular basis, I'm pitched for my podcast and such, I'm pitched other people who are writing about Stoicism, right? And so their deals are all are all easier for higher amounts of money based on the track record that I have and the media attention that I've brought to this space. Now, I'm not like jealous of it. That's not what I'm putting out. What I'm saying is the irony is it was easier for them in some ways, right? But it will ultimately actually be much harder for them to be successful because people don't actually have that much room for that many different flavors of one thing. So you see this in all different kinds. Most markets are winner take all markets, right? And so people will see that someone's successful in a market and think, oh, I could be successful there too. And it's the irony is the fact that someone is already there and successful makes it safer, but also less likely that you will be significantly successful. So I'm always interested in what are other people not doing. That's what I want to do. Or what are other people doing? Let's not do that. And that's how you stand out. Fearlessness kind of feels like a strong word to describe that, but I am always interested in being different or unique. Because ironically, it's scarier to be like everyone else. It's a riskier proposition.
So let's talk about the inner phenomenon of fear a little bit. I think you started working with Robert Greene on the book, The 50th Law, that he wrote with 50 Cent on the importance of being fearless. And your latest book, which I've just pre-ordered, by the way, is called Courage is Calling, on one of the great 4 Stoic virtues of courage. And in a lot of ways, we seem to be living in a climate of fear today, almost panic. I mean, people are scared of everything. They're scared of whether it's COVID or big government or big corporations or a grand global conspiracy or the evil people on the other side of the political aisle or the rise of China or just like being judged on social media and being hated on. And for sure, there are real challenges out there. But there's an emotional climate, it seems, almost drenched in the energy of fear and negativity. And you write this in The Obstacle is the Way, which is a fantastic book. I probably my favorite one of yours. Don't let the negativity in. Don't let those emotions even get started. Just say, no, thank you. I can't afford to panic. This is the skill that must be cultivated. Freedom from disturbance and perturbation. So you can focus your energy exclusively on solving problems rather than reacting to them. How do you train yourself to tune out all the noise and negativity coming from every direction, it seems, and those emotions and the fear that it can give rise to, and just stay on task and stay on your path and keep executing at such a high level?
Well, one of the things I tell myself is that the thing I'm trying to do is very hard, right? Whether it's giving a talk or it's writing a book or it's starting a business or whatever, it's very hard. And most people don't succeed at it, right? And so if it's hard and the margin of error is low, then time spent worrying, listening to doubters, being anxious, focusing on these things that you don't really control is only taking away from a finite amount of cognitive ability or resources that you have to focus on the problem. I actually have a quote here on the side of my wall that I've been thinking about as I've been writing this new series, and it's a quote from Martha Graham. And she says, "Never be afraid of the material. The material knows when you're frightened, and it will not help." And what I like about that is the idea of like, you should be tackling really ambitious, challenging things that are a reach for you, that it's harder than something you've done before. It's something maybe you don't quite understand. It's a big leap, right? So you should be doing that. But then the irony is, if you are afraid, if you are doing it now out of timidity or doubt, or you're coming at it from a place of uncertainty, you will likely, it will be harder. You will not be successful. So like when I'm writing this series of books, I'm not going, this is so hard. You've never done a 4-book series before. What if it doesn't work? I'm just thinking, it's a 4-book series. You've already written 4 books before. Thinking about the totality of the problem is going to be overwhelming. What do you have to do today? Let's just do that. And then we'll take it from there.
So you're very practical in how you break down these philosophical. I almost think like in Aristotle's tradition, like the emphasis on practical wisdom, right? It's not like this crazy construction. It's just like, look, I have limited bandwidth. What I'm doing is difficult. And then it just logically sort of coheres with that if you spend energy and time focusing on, what other people are saying, you're just removing that. It's a very practical consideration. I find it very, very interesting and very helpful actually to just break it down in very simple, pragmatic terms like this. Attempting big things, you need every ounce of energy. It makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. I think it's a resource allocation issue to me.
Interesting. So what would be a great fear that you'd say you've overcome in your life that has actually helped you become who you've become today? What was an example of a fear that you had maybe at one point where you feel that your ability to overcome that contributed to, turning into who you are today?
Well, I've got a bunch of them, but sort of 2 that were related. The sort of 2 big transition points in my life were first when I dropped out of college to work for Robert, and then second when after I'd gone on and had a career in marketing, to leave the marketing world, to leave like the sure thing of a salary to become a writer. Then you could argue maybe the decision to go from one kind of writing to the other kind of writing. But the 3 things all have in common the idea of sort of leaving the status quo or the comfort of the present moment behind for a riskier but potentially more lucrative or exciting or fulfilling future, right? The decision to transition from one thing to another, to change courses. And the first time I did it, I was like just beyond terrified. Like I thought I'd end up under a bridge somewhere. My family was terrified. My parents basically like disowned me. It was like the biggest thing that I had done in my life at that point, right? Like I wasn't just like trying some new thing. I was blowing up, 20 years of work and direction and safety to do an uncertain thing. But the interesting thing that I found almost immediately thereafter was that it was a lot less scary than I thought. I remember walking in to drop out and thinking like it was this sort of irrevocable, life-altering decision. And I was like, I'm here to drop out of college or whatever. And I remember the woman in the office was like, that's not a thing. She was like, you can take a semester off and then just not re-enroll. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that, And so I thought I was like jumping off this cliff, and I get there and it's like, dude, there's like stairs. Just walk down the stairs and then you can come back up if you don't like what you see at the bottom, right? And so realizing very quickly that it was a lot less scary than you think. It's only scary because you haven't done it, was really helpful to me. And then to see as I went through that, I was stronger than I knew. I was more talented than I perhaps thought, that I had more control over my life than I thought, then allowed me the other sort of pivot moments. It was like, I've been at a juncture like this before, right? If you never have, and you avoid it each time, it gets scarier. If you go towards it, if you explore it, then it gets less scary as you go. So like if you told me tomorrow, let's say tomorrow it was like, hey, do you want to sell everything you own and move to South America to start a llama farm or something? If I actually wanted to do that, I'd be like, sure, I could do that. Like I could figure that out, right? There are a lot scarier things in the world than that, right? And I imagine, the first time you run into a building as a firefighter, the first time you're under fire as a special forces operator, you have a similar understanding of, oh, okay, part of why this was so intimidating and scary to me was my lack of familiarity with it. And now that I'm familiar with it, I understand it, and I understand there's a process. If I follow that process, I'll be successful more often than not.
So it's almost like not jumping to the extreme conclusion or the extreme scenario of what might happen when I do this, and just kind of focusing on like the next step and then the next step, and then investing yourself in that process, giving yourself a chance, telling yourself, you know what, we can always pivot, we can always move, we can always counter move. It's not the end of the story, right? Not staying at that freeze frame moment in the distant future of all the catastrophic things that may happen.
Yes.
And again, just going back down to the practicality of the next step. Sounds like that's the process that they've gone through.
We sort of have these vague ideas of what we're worried about. We have these fears, but we don't actually understand them. And so when you explore them or you experience them, you do have that familiarity. And so it's, the Stoics talk about how what's foreseen lands less heavily than what is unforeseen. So like on a book, it could fail. It could be not just a failure, it could be an embarrassing failure. So what? You know what I mean? I've now explored that, thought about it, touched it enough that, again, there's worse things that could happen, right? And so I think when you, instead of like, oh, I don't want to talk about that, that's scary, or like, I don't want it to be a bad omen or bad luck or whatever, you almost make it scarier because it's undefined.